I feel like the shock of James Harden being traded has overshadowed something that otherwise would be the biggest story in basketball, which is, of course, Ben Simmons is no longer a Sixer. We don't have to deal with that constant nightmare of a story anymore. Of course, early on it was nice because it was kind of the only thing to talk about and it kept plenty of NBA YouTubers' careers afloat. But at a certain point, it just became exhausting. But it is finally over, and now we get to talk about Ben Simmons and the fact that he is a Brooklyn Net. What that means for Ben's career as well as what it means for the Nets. So let's just talk about him being there. Before I continue on with this video, there is about a 50% chance that you're watching this and you are not subscribed. So if you fall in that latter half, then please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy today's video. And if you enjoy today's video, also drop a like on it. Helps it perform much better in YouTube's algorithm, and it is much appreciated. Ben Simmons' fit in Brooklyn could not be more perfect. In fact, if I'm looking around the league, there is not one, and I mean not one team, that I think Ben fits better on. It's not necessarily the team he would have the most impact on, but I really think that is going to be for the better. The Brooklyn Nets have two factors that work heavily in Ben's favor, which is the roster construction and then what is expected of Ben based on that roster. The Sixers for Ben's entire career have looked to him to be their second best player, and thus it has always felt as though his lack of scoring was a bigger deal than it would otherwise in other circumstances, especially if he was treated basically as like the third guy. I don't think it was wrong to project Ben Simmons to be a decent scorer in the NBA, like a 20-point per game guy, and thus I don't think it was wrong to build a team around that expectation. However, that's just not the player Ben Simmons is from a mentality standpoint. Because of his physicality and his ability to drive, he could average 20 points per game jump shot or no. But the wiring of his brain does not tell him to be that type of player, so you can't build around him to be that guy. In Brooklyn, there's going to be nights where he's like the fifth option, depending on how many shots Joe Harris and Seth Curry are getting, so he really just doesn't need to be a scorer there. Ben is not built to be the second option on a team, and that's okay. It's just the Sixers had different expectations than what they actually got, and that led to a lot of disappointment. But now that we understand fully the type of player that Ben Simmons is, this is the perfect situation for him. In Brooklyn, his weakness scoring the ball is going to be less apparent because he has two of the greatest scorers of all time on the perimeter. If Ben takes 8 to 10 shots a game, it's perfectly fine. All they really need for him is to take the open shots around the rim, not force too much, because you have two of the best forcing a shot options in basketball. When are you ever going to look to Ben Simmons to be a primary initiator when you have either of those guys on the floor? Might happen when those guys are out, but at least when it comes time to the nitty-gritty, Ben Simmons is not going to be asked to do a whole lot. So, hiding that weakness now allows Ben Simmons to fully emphasize his strength, and for his strength to be the most apparent part of his game. His two biggest strengths, of course, are his defense and his playmaking, and we'll talk about that defense in a second because it's important, but it's not really that in-depth. The offense, however, needs a deep looking into, and I'm really praying that my vision for what the Nets do with Ben Simmons is in fact what they actually do with him. Ben should finally be used in the Draymond Green role offensively. Set screens both on and off ball, dive to the rim when appropriate, and facilitate the offense, not so much as someone who takes the ball up the floor, but rather as the part 2 of an action. Draymond Green is one of the greatest pick and roll players of all time, and that is not because he is a huge threat to score. He is statistically an okay finisher at the rim for a power forward, and he does it on pretty low volume. He's not a great pick and pop option, obviously. The reason Draymond is a great pick and roll player has nothing to do with his ability to put the ball in the basket, as we all well know. It's the fact that as a secondary playmaker, it doesn't get much better than him. With Draymond Green as the roll man, the Warriors pretty much always run secondary actions separate from that pick and roll, and it creates openings that Draymond Green is going to find every single time. As Curry and Draymond run their action, Andre Iguodala is setting a screen for Klay, and by the time Klay is open, Draymond is diving to the basket. He gets the pass, draws the attention of the defense, he swings out to Klay Thompson for the three-pointer. Or maybe in the confusion and the defense trying to get over to Klay, they ignored Andre Iguodala cutting to the basket, and now Draymond Green throws him a lob, which I felt like happened one time a game back when he was more young in the Warriors system. Not old man Iggy, it doesn't happen quite as often now. Playmaking out of the pick and roll as the roll man is the perfect role offensively for Ben Simmons. Said roll a couple of times in that sentence, but you get my point. Kyrie sets the screen, Ben gets the ball on the roll. From there, he can attack if he has the proper matchup. He can pass it out to a shooter, maybe Kevin Durant or Bruce Brown are cutting to the rim. And worst case, there's no shot available, so Ben throws it out to Kevin Durant and Kyrie, and then they can create a shot out of nothing. Whereas previously, he was kicking it out to like JJ Redick, Furkan Korkmaz, Matisse Thybulle, guys who, frankly, not going to create their shot quite as well as Kevin Durant and Kyrie are. So if the possession falls apart, it's less on Ben Simmons because those guys can bail them out better than just about any other team in basketball. This situation is perfect. If it goes right, it goes extremely right. And if it goes wrong, there's still a way better bailout than previously there was. And you know how I mentioned shooters? The Brooklyn Nets might be the most deep shooting team of all time. Seth Curry, Joe Harris, Patty Mills, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant. That is 5 phenomenal three-point shooters, and Kevin Durant is statistically the worst of all of those guys. So if you're running a team where your 5th best shooter is Kevin Durant, you're doing pretty fucking good, I'd say. And that's taken into account volume and percentage and all of that. Like, off of the dribble, Kevin Durant's the best three-point shooter there, but everyone's different. You know what I mean? Either way, great core of shooters is my point. Using Ben as the roll man out of the pick and roll, and he now has as much space to operate as you feasibly can in basketball. If a single help defender comes, Ben is going to find the open man, and maybe the ball swings after that and Ben does not get the assist himself. But either way, his function in the offense creates a great shot every time. Really more so than even James Harden would, because good as James Harden was, I feel like his role was pretty redundant versus what we would see from Ben Simmons here, where James Harden's not a pick and roll playmaker, he's just another perimeter shot creator, and he's also a great playmaker, but the way in which he does it, I feel like wasn't as necessary and as impactful as how Ben Simmons' playmaking would be on the Nets. Also, Ben Simmons at center is something that I have talked about as a hypothetical thing before. I feel like that only becomes more obvious of a thing to run now that you're in Brooklyn. Last year in the playoffs, the Nets were running Jeff Green as the starting 5, and they were perfectly adequate on defense, even against the Milwaukee Bucks, so I don't feel as though it's going to be a huge weakness, and Ben is much better on that side than Jeff Green would be. But if you had a 5 who could space the floor, that would be more ideal, but frankly, I'm tired of seeing Ben next to a more traditional, can only finish around the basket center. So let's get funky and modern with it. I realize Joel Embiid can shoot threes, but it was on such a low volume that the spacing impact was not that significant in terms of Ben being able to operate around the rim. Like a shooter is what I want out there, not a guy who shoots 35% on 3 attempts. Again, good big man shooter doesn't mean good shooter. That's a stupid, outdated thought process that needs to stop being said. So if you run a lineup with Kyrie, Seth Curry, Joe Harris, Kevin Durant, and Ben Simmons, holy shit, that's so much spacing. That's like 4 elite shooters and Ben Simmons. It doesn't get much better than that. Now, what's great about this situation defensively for Ben Simmons is it's going to allow him to shine more than he ever has. The Brooklyn Nets this year are 19th in defense, and I feel like Ben's addition pretty much automatically is going to push them towards 10 or so, at least in that ballpark. And the difference between here versus Philadelphia is his defense is going to stand out by comparison to him playing alongside the likes of Joel Embiid and even Matisse Thybulle. It's kind of like how if you are attractive, but you hang out with a bunch of other attractive people, you don't really stand out. But if you're attractive and you have a bunch of ugly friends, suddenly you stand out a lot. Great metaphor. Basically, the impact Ben Simmons has defensively is going to be a whole lot more obvious because it's significantly obvious that he is the best defender on this team. So when you see one player individually impacting a defense, it's going to stand out more than if he is arguably your 3rd best defender, probably your 2nd. because I think Matisse Thybulle is an overrated defender, but that's a different conversation. Now, the title of this video is "This is Ben Simmons' last chance," or some shit like that. What I mean by that is not that this is Ben Simmons' last chance to be an NBA player or anything like that, but I do believe this is his last chance to really prove the type of player that he can be, just because the circumstances are never going to get more ideal than this. Any excuse that Ben Simmons previously had for his on-court production, primarily spacing and him being utilized within the offense properly, all of that is going to be gone. The situation could not be more ideal for him to emphasize his strengths and hide his weakness, and thus prove the value that he has as a player. I've actually said a few times well before this trade went down that the Nets would be the perfect spot for Ben Simmons, but obviously that was never going to happen, because what would they trade, like Nick Claxton and a 2028 first-round pick? Well, then James Harden asked out of Brooklyn and this became a whole nother thing. But even without James Harden factored in the equation, I still think the Brooklyn Nets are the perfect spot for Ben Simmons. And if he is going to prove to still be an all-star caliber player, if he's going to prove to be a significantly valuable and significantly impactful player, if he doesn't do it here, he's not going to do it anywhere ever again. Hopefully he can do that. I think he will. I'm very confident that he will. I mean, you never want to bet too much on Ben Simmons. He's proven that before. But as much as I'm comfortable betting, that's how much I'm going to bet, whatever that means. I think Ben Simmons will look really good in Brooklyn, and I love that fit. And dare I say, I like the fit so much on top of the addition of Seth Curry that I don't even think the Nets necessarily got worse if they utilized Ben Simmons the way that I think they would and should. But yeah, shout out to Rudy for editing this video. That is the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.